Tilea's Troubles, Part 39. Holy blessings upon this weapon, may it serve More's purpose. First prequel to the assault on Viadaza battle report. The city of Rimas, late spring, 2402. As Father Biagino and his personal guard walked into the Piazza d'Ageslio, the sky darkened momentarily. Nothing more than the shifting of clouds, but to him it was made more ominous by his thoughts and concerns. He was here to bless the Riemann artillery, an element of the Archlector's forces that had not joined in the recent parade, yet one which most soldiers believed was in particular need of prayers, to function not only well, but safely. Biagino himself knew the importance of guns, having witnessed at Pontramola how the foe would fall to blades only to rise again, knitted back together by wicked magics, while those blasted apart by iron shot took considerably longer to reanimate, their splintered bones scattered widely, their shivered arms and armour beyond necromantic repair. Most Riemans would agree with him, and so much hope was pinned on the artillery in the coming battle, not just Dalione's marvellously fashioned steam bastion, but also these brass-barrelled pieces. Together, they promised a most modern form of warfare, of a kind that could bring down even massive and monstrous foes on the field of battle from a distance, and which could slay entire files of undead before their stench was even smelled by the soldiers of Rimas. There were 3 pieces in the square, each attended by veteran gunners and the newly recruited matrosas busy learning their art. They had already fired this morning, using only powder and wadding. Biagino had heard the latest blast from several streets away, and although the smoke from the volley had been cleared away by the fresh breeze, the smell of brimstone lingered. After battle, the crews would no doubt reek of the stuff, as if their pockets were packed with rotten eggs, and their new clothes, brightly coloured in the Riemann livery of orange, blue and red, would be blackened and singed. The drummer by Biagino's side had announced their arrival in the square with a pretty peal, and now the master gunner strode over to greet them. By the look of him, his heavy black beard, his stern expression, the fellow was a veteran. Of course he had to be, as the Archlector's clerks would not have hired him if he had failed to present adequate proof of his expertise. Considering the nature of mercenaries, Biagino wondered just what cruel acts this man might have perpetrated over the years, potentially a veritable torrent of murderous robberies and assaults. Let us hope, he thought, this fellow can put all that behind him in his present service. Indeed, the Archlector had promised each and every crusading soldier that More would forgive them all their sins and open the gates of his eternal garden to them if they served well. It was an absolution that would cleanse any man of a long litany of crimes. "Tomorrow, Father," said the gunner, "come to chant a prayer or 2 over our newborn pieces. If you please, make 'em powerful prayers. I've seen what happens when a barrel bursts, and it ain't a pretty sight." "You doubt our gunsmith's skills, then?" said Biagino, trying to match the man's banter. "No, good priest. Brass is better than iron, I reckon, and I'm sure this brass is flawless and pure, like the church itself." Someone in the square suppressed a snigger. "But I intend to work them hard, to make these barrels hotter than hot. Best mix in some cooling charms, too, if you can." "I am no hedge wizard, dealing in petty cantrips, but a priest of More, channeling his divine will to those who deserve it." The master gunner grinned. "Then you've come to the right place, Father, because we're all deserving. The Archlector himself said so." Biagino had not expected such irreverence, although perhaps he should have. Suddenly the man looked sombre again, stepped a little closer, and spoke a little quieter. "No disrespect meant, Father. Just soldiers' banter for the sake of the boys here. 'Tain't an easy thing to go up against what we face. There'll be no surrenders when the slaughter gets too much, no parleys to catch our breath. We're to risk our lives facing death itself, not march around burning fields and robbing cattle. Best then to keep these lads occupied with postures, procedures and puns. Takes the mind off tomorrow. A bit of bravado doesn't go amiss either." Biagino understood. Fear was a soldier's worst enemy when facing the undead. Religious conviction could diminish it, but if not, then perhaps bluster and boasting might indeed quash it almost as well. "Well and good," he told the gunner. I have no doubt you know your business. In this war, however, it is more who will guide us to victory, whether we do so laughing or crying. Now, let us go about what must be done." The two of them walked over to the first piece, a mortar. Like the crews, it too sported the city's livery, with colourful wheels pretty enough for a travelling player's wagon. Its wide muzzle looked terrifying, but of course would not worry a foe who felt no fear. Although Biagino had never seen a mortar in action, he knew them by reputation. Sometimes called murderers, they were reckoned to be one of the most dangerous weapons to their own crew, as in order to fire them, one had to tip a lighted grenado of massive size down a short barrel already stuffed with powder, with only a wooden bung to separate the burning fuse and the charge. It did not take the expertise of a gunner to recognise how the simplest error, or the tiniest flaw in either barrel, grenade, bung or fuse could tear weapon and crew to pieces. It was no surprise then, thought Biagino, that the master gunner escorted him here first. Biagino spoke the blessing and sprinkled some holy water from the flagon he carried on the piece, while the crew listened intently as if to gauge the potency of his words. Once done, Biagino asked the gunner, "You have witnessed one of these at work in battle?" "Oh, yes, Father. A nasty beast should it land a grenade amongst a body of men, and it can work great terrors against a garrison, lobbing fiery death right over the walls to anywhere within. This one is a monster indeed. It'll need a good 8 horses to shift it." The man seemed to know his stuff, thought Biagino. "I saw the brutes from Campagrotta carrying iron and brass barrels, not that much smaller than your other pieces here," said Biagino, gesturing to the pair of culverins. "Yet they had no carriages. I scarce believe them to be real guns. Do the brutes really intend to hold them as they fire?" "They do. But they don't load with round shot, Father, merely hail or case. That stuff doesn't kick quite the same. Ogres might be strong, but not enough to take the 16 pounds of iron this pair fires. I reckon even a 6-pound round shot would take their arm right out of its socket." Biagino blessed both the culverins too, and the crews manning them. Once he was done, he began to bid the soldiers farewell, promising that he would be with the army to help ensure more watched over them in their holy fight. But the master gunner interrupted him, gesturing at a man carrying a cask. "What?" asked Biagino, somewhat confused. "The powder," explained the gunner. "You'll bless that also, Father. Ask more to keep it dry and healthy." Yes, of course," said Biagino, and for a 4th time commenced his prayers. Considering he had 2 other piazzas and a yard yet to visit, this was going to be a long day. Tilea's Troubles, Part 39 continued. The day before we met our dead. Second prequel to the assault on Via d'Azza battle report. Summer 2402, 2 leagues from Via d'Azza. As he approached the spot where the Archlector was about to receive the army's scouts, Father Biagino attempted to look inconspicuous, as if merely passing by upon some errand. Being a priest of More, one of the leaders of the Via d'Azzan crusade no less, no guards thought to stop him. Almost anyone else would have been suspected, and certainly not allowed so close without at least explaining their presence. The first thing to catch his eye was the formed company of soldiers standing guard, clothed in the blue and red of Rimas, with a fluttering, oddly shaped standard bearing one of the Archlector's argent keys, a key to More's heavenly garden. Despite the livery and the ensign, however, they were not Remans nor Tileans, nor even worshippers of More. They came from the far distant and mysterious realm of Cathay, being one of several such mercenary companies in Reman employ for many years now. He was not alone in thinking Cathayans were somewhat unusual participants in a wholly Morite war. Their role in the state army of Rimas was, however, widely understood. Ever since the disgrace of the corrupt Archlector Federigo Ordini during the time of the Tilean Terror, when the secular overlord of Rimas took command of the city's forces to prevent any further folly, the army had been almost wholly composed of foreign mercenaries. This was hardly a novelty in Tilea, as Estalian caballeros, ultramontane halberdiers, and border princes, brigand archers were hired by many a city-state. All these accepted Holy More as the god of death, part of the pantheon of lawful gods, and even if their first prayers in battle might be to Myrmidia, Sigmar, or even Ulrich, it was the blessing of a Morite priest they sought when mortally wounded. These Cathayans, however, served none of the gods known in Tilea, instead worshipping strange and distant deities, whose very names were unpronounceable. Back during Federigo Ordini's fall, and the distrust of the church it caused, such foreigners were actively sought, all the better to ensure that a corrupted priest might no more bend them to his will. For it had become painfully clear that even an archlector might not be loyal only to More, but instead driven by worldly greed and a lust for power. And so, the quiet Cathayans' reassuring continued presence in the Riemann standing army had begun. Nevertheless, here and now, among a blessed army commanded by priests, and half composed of willing volunteers and soldiers supplied by several Tilean powers, the Cathayans did seem out of place. Still, pondered Biagino, considering that only a year ago no one thought that an archlector would ever again command the army, their presence was merely one more peculiarity in a world turned upside down by the vampires. Once he had found a spot from which to watch and listen without being too noticeable, Biagino spotted the dwarven scouts already making their way through the camp. While they approached, he looked over at the Archlector Callictus II. Wearing his simple red cloak and unadorned hat, with only a little gold work upon his brown belted cassock, it was the Archlector's face that drew people's attention, then held it. Strikingly gaunt, his stern expression reflected both what he expected of himself and of others. His piercing eyes were, at least to those with true faith and insight, visibly illuminated by More's blessing. It dawned on Biagino that here was the answer. Callictus was the reason why Cathayans, ogres, dwarfs, and all the rest were marching together as one. Not his office and the authority granted by it, nor his robes and all the outward dignity of religious nobility, but the man himself. All who looked upon his holiness saw someone they could fully trust. Even if they worshipped other gods and were not particularly interested in seeking More's divine guidance, as of course Callictus always strove to do, they knew he spoke only truths and kept his promises. This Archlector seemed as far from the cunning and conniving character of Ordini as one could get. It was Callictus the man who could command the secular state of Remus and all its forces, then lead them to battle, despite the disastrous and false holy war of only 60 years previously. The passage of time had no doubt played a part in assuaging Riemann doubts, and the undead nature of the foe proved the need for decisive action, but it was the man himself, formidable, devout, determined, who had finally tipped the balance. So it was that several forces were welded into one: men and brutes, foreign mercenaries and city militia, Riemanns and Pavonans. From the most able of genius artificers, Angelo da Leone, who had brought his marvellous steam engine, to the most crazed of gibbering, flagellating fanatics, raised from the city's poorest quarters by the raving priest, Father Antonello. From the proud nobility of Remus, bedecked in gorgeously fluted, laminated armour from knight's head to horse's knee, to the outcast peasant archers of Campo Grotta, in their mud-flecked linen rags, all marching side by side beneath the banners of the Riemann Church of More. And the dwarfs, of course, who had just that moment arrived before the Archlector. They had been sent out, as well as a company of Riemann Bravi, to learn what they could of the now nightmarish city of Viadazza. The Bravi had returned with little to report, their faces ashen and limbs trembling, their words a confused tumble of prayers, warnings, and whimpers. Biagino had learned, at the Battle of Pontramola, that men could face the walking dead and fight well, while priests sang litanies to heap blessings upon them, and holy paraphernalia invoked More's protection. But if such things were absent, he knew from his own experience that the fear then engendered by both the sight and stench of the undead could sap all courage, leaving an empty, choking pit where one's guts were supposed to be. Biagino hoped the dwarfs had not been so affected. The dwarfs were not alone, having several Easterners with them, not more Cathayans but Nipponese swordmasters. masked, barefooted men with fine steel blades, ridiculously rumoured to be sharp enough to slice parchment in two. Not the normal way, but separating front from back to form two equally sized, impossibly thin sheets. In any other army, the sight of such dissimilar warriors working together as one would be the talk of the camp. But in this army, it was only to be expected. Biagino noticed that one of the dwarfs also wore a scarf to hide his face. Odd, he thought. Maybe the fellow's beard was too bright a shade of ginger, and he didn't want to reveal the scout's position by it. But then why was the white-bearded dwarf not similarly wrapped? Perhaps the dwarf was so impressed by his eastern companions he had taken to dressing like them, an action more gnomish in nature than dwarven. Or did the fellow have some mutilation to hide, which in the case of a dwarf might be nothing more than an ill-clipped beard? He shook his head to clear it of such babble. It was lack of sleep that made his thoughts stray so easily and wildly. The dwarf at the front did the talking. He was clothed in chainmail, wore his beard in neat braids, and carried an iron hammer as big as a 2-pint pot upon his shoulder. Having bowed to the arch-lector in the abrupt dwarven manner, he began his report.
Your Holiness, we've done as you commanded, looked upon the foe. We counted those on the roads and byways, approaching to within half a crossbow shot of the walls. The enemy is not as strong as us, but is in no ways weak or ill-prepared.
Callictus flexed his fingers. Do you mean they have intelligence of our approach, or that they are diligent in their watchfulness?
I cannot say for certain. They're not the sort of enemy we can capture and question, but I believe they must know we're close. The city walls are manned in strength both day and night, and they've strong patrols covering a distance of 4 miles from the gates.
Biagino wondered whether the limit of the enemy patrols was due to how far their vampiric master's will could reach. The patrols? They are undead? Asked the Archlector, which Biagino took to mean that he too was weighing the same matter.
Yes, Your Holiness. Long-dead horsemen, bleached bones devoid of all flesh. Hooves are clattering as loud as living horses. You can hear them coming some way off, what with so much rocky ground, on or off the paths, all around the city. They rode in companies, columns of 2, banners at the fore, like soldiers. One lot even had a drummer beating silently at the remnants of mouldy leather atop a pair of copper kettles.
Did they see you? Asked the Archlector. The dwarf pondered a moment, then turned to look at his company. Some shook their heads a little, others shrugged.
I think not, Your Holiness. They gave no sign of doing so, nor did they approach us. They didn't even turn to look our way.
The officer by the Archlector's side, a mercenary captain from Astiano, whose name Biagino had yet to learn, suddenly perked up. But do the dead need to look in order to see? They don't require eyeballs, which should surely prove a much more troublesome deficiency compared to failing to turn one's head. Biagino wondered if the captain was related to the noble Duccio family, long famed for their philosophical bent. Perhaps his family desired favour with Astiano's new rulers, and so he'd come along with the Pavonans. The undead are not bound by natural laws, but by unnatural ones, answered the Archlector, in a matter-of-fact tone that very much surprised Biagino. It was as if he were lecturing a pupil on a spring morning. Only in a vampire's face can one see expression, and even then it is never to be trusted, for their very existence is a lie, and what they choose to show the world is rarely the truth. Still, it matters not whether the riders saw these scouts, if Lord Adolfo already knew of our approach. The Astianan frowned. So we cannot surprise them? I doubt it, said the Archlector, but we can attack before Lord Adolfo has any more time to prepare, before any relief can be sent to him. He turned back to the dwarf. You said you looked upon the walls, that they were manned in strength. Tell me exactly what you saw.
There's not a wall unguarded, Your Holiness. I looked upon each with my perspective glass. 12 guards at least upon every stretch, many of them skeletons, with long spears, some armoured too. And on the other walls there were still rotting undead, perhaps more than the skeletons, and we saw fly-blown ogres guarding the gate.
That hasn't changed, thought Biagino. When Lord Adolfo was still mortal, both the seaward and landward entrances of his city had always been guarded by brutes. Now he was a vampire, why wouldn't his brutes be zombies? Biagino had already expected undead ogres in the city, for the fisherman Carlo had reported their presence to him. In truth, there was nothing described so far that he had not himself told the Archlector. He had written lengthy reports concerning both what other witnesses had told him and the massed horse and foot he had personally witnessed outside Viadaza. Except, of course, and somewhat crucial to the true picture, he could not have claimed knowledge that all these things were still at Viadaza. Until the scouts looked with their own eyes, it was entirely possible that Lord Adolfo's main strength might already have moved elsewhere. This made Biagino think of his recent nightmares. Catching his breath after the victory at Pontramola, the cheers of his battered regiment as the enemy falls back. No one has the strength to pursue them, but it's not necessary. The enemy is beaten. The vampire duke is dead. The tide is turned. But then the dream changes, and he is hiding with Ugo in the trees east of Viadaza, watching as the vampire duchess is welcomed into the city by Adolfo's hellish army. Panic wells inside him. There has been no victory. Pontramola was a trick, an illusion. Even as the Viadazan crusaders cheer at the sight of the enemy falling away, in truth the enemy has already passed them by, and the city has fallen. Again, the dream changes, and now is with the Riemann Holy Army. The soldiers shouting their own cheers, for once more the enemy has begun to retreat. His legs grow weak, his sword slips from his grip, for he knows that their retreat is no different from that at Pontramola, yielding nothing more than a hollow victory. The real enemy is already behind them, even now swarming through yet another town, their rot reaching to infect more of Tilea. For this enemy, to die is to be undead. To be defeated is to be undefeated. His head swims as the macabre dance unwinds around him. Attack, feint, rise, fall, win, lose, while his dancing Duchess partner manoeuvres him, step by lurching step, ever closer to... He jolted from his disturbing reverie, as if waking from the dream itself. The dwarf was still speaking.
Without need of a gate, for they were weaving freely through the very walls, outside, then inside, now outside again. It was as if the grey stone were nothing more than mist. Their horses' hooves barely touched the ground, if at all, and they were lit by green flames, as if they'd been doused in oil and set ablaze.
"Enough, Master Dwarf," snapped Calictus. "Let's not wax so lyrical about such horrors in the camp, shall we? We will face them soon enough, and when we do, it will be with Moor's blessing as our armour, and Moor's will as our nerve. Still, it will help if the soldiers have a good night's sleep tonight. So, as I said, no mention of this again until the battle is won." "Indeed, Your Holiness, a good night's sleep is the whetstone of success," said the Astianan captain, quoting some ancient scholar on the art of war. A good night's sleep, thought Biagino. If only.